Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Welcome. This is Arcana Unearthed. If you've not joined us for an episode of this before, then welcome. This is a rather unimaginatively named show in which we look into the Unearthed Arcana releases for Dungeons and Dragons, 5th edition as it's now been referred to again, what was 1D&D, and we're currently going through playtest packet number 6, which is the latest one, and hoping to get as much of it covered before playtest packet number 7 comes out, which I'm expecting is probably really only a matter of a handful of weeks at this stage. So we are going to be looking through the Rules Glossary today. I did, in the last episode, start to cover some of that as we kind of hit the tail end of the Bard, in the hopes of catching up because I was a little bit behind schedule, but unfortunately we ran out of time. So I am going to start from the beginning again, just for anybody that missed that particular episode, because it was quite a long one. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, cover all of that, because we only got maybe a page or so through, and look at the latest mechanical term changes. I wouldn't necessarily say they're full-blown mechanical changes, but just some new terms that are being thrown around, some new action types, and some new condition types as well. So I'm also really pretty chuffed with myself because I've been fairly new to the live streaming things. I've been producing video and audio content for a long time, but not really live stuff. And I've been really trying to rack my brains for weeks on how to get it so that you can see what I'm looking at, so you can follow along on your screen and not just listen to me trying to read it aloud to you. So you can see it too, because that's quite helpful for some people. So I am delighted to show you that I've managed to suss it out. I consider myself to be, excuse me, relatively technically savvy. So the fact it's taken me so long is making me doubt my own abilities with tech of late. But yes, so we are going to be covering the Rules Glossary. So for those that are following along and are not familiar with the Rules Glossary, this glossary, as stated here in the playtest material, is a glossary of game terms, and specifically any terms that come up during this episode and any of as we go through this are specifically terms that have new meanings, as well as things like the creature types that aren't defined in the 2014 Player's Handbook. Now, specifically, they are defined in the Monster Manual, the 2014 Monster Manual, but that's not something that's come up in the Player's Handbook before. So I'll be interested to see if there's any mechanical differences that they've made to this, but it's probably just lore-based definition in many ways. So just to clarify to anybody following along as well, if a term doesn't appear in this rules glossary, that does mean that it uses the definition of the 2014 Player's Handbook. And also, they have stated that when you're using this playtest document, if you are actually utilising some of this at your game table to try it out rather than just wax poetical about it, that you shouldn't use the rules glossary of any other Unearthed Arcana article. So this is the latest, the most up-to-date version. So this goes through alphabetical, so we will go through equally alphabetically unless there's any reason to jump around, which I can't imagine there will be. So let's look then at armor training. So armor training is essentially a new name for the armor proficiencies. I can't quite remember what the logic was behind it. I think it was just a semantic thing, as it relates to being proficient in armor. Doesn't really make sense because you're just wearing something. So they've changed it to armor training, in that you're now trained to be able to wear it. I don't really quite understand why they changed it, but I kind of prefer the term rather than armor proficiency. I guess as well it's called armor training because of some slight mechanical tweaks, I guess, maybe. I'm trying to remember now. It's been a long time since this term came up. But ultimately, as it relates to the rules now, If you wear light, medium, or heavy armor and lack the armor training with that type of armor, you have disadvantage on any d20 test you make that involves strength or dexterity, and you can't cast spells. So it has changed slightly. Now, this D20 test term might be a new term to you if you haven't been following along to the Arcana Unearthed stuff that has been coming out of late. So we will come to that in a moment. As it refers to shields, if you equip a shield and lack armor training with it, you don't gain the armor class bonus of the shield. So essentially, if you're not armor trained in shields, they are useless to you, essentially. So now we have the attack action. So they are really redefining actions and certain actions and really clarifying what the various actions actually mean. Now, the attack action is... I'm trying to think now, because I've always thought of weapon attacks and things as an attack action. And I think that kind of remains the same, but they've maybe just clarified it a little bit and clarified a few things as it relates to equipping and unequipping things, which we'll come to in a moment. So when you take the attack action, you can make one attack with a weapon or an unarmed strike. So I suppose what they're going for here is, rather than stating when you make a weapon attack, they're simply saying when you take an attack action. Which just makes it a little bit easier and a little bit more uniform. Which, again, if you've been following along with any of the other Arcana Unearthed episodes, seems to be a running theme throughout much of this playtest material, is just about trying to clarify those things a little bit more and make them more uniform, so it's there's much less room to maneuver in terms of interpretation. Now, talking about interpretation, equipping and unequipping weapons has been reworded and clarified, and there's an interesting change in here, shall we say. So, because the equipping and unequipping of weapons has always been an interesting debate, and universally the consensus tends to be that one can either draw or sheath a weapon during a turn. They can't do both, but you are welcome to drop a weapon. That's how most tables rule it these days, I think. So this is an interesting clarification, or change, potentially. So you can either equip or unequip one weapon when you make an attack as part of this action. You do so either before or after the attack. If you equip a weapon before an attack, you don't need to use it for that attack. Equipping a weapon includes drawing it from a sheath, picking it up, or retrieving it from a container. Unequipping a weapon includes sheathing, stowing, or dropping it. So what they've clarified here, importantly I think, is the dropping one. You now won't be able to drop a weapon as part of your equipping and unequipping weapons part of your attack action, which means that you are now limited to either sheathing or drawing, essentially, in any way, shape or form. So that dropping loophole has now gone. So it's going to be interesting to see how that affects the kind of action economy. But I do like that they have clarified that you can equip a weapon either before or after an attack, or unequip the weapon equally. So in that sense, what you can do is you can make an attack with a sword, for example, and then unequip the sword, ready for you to then draw a crossbow next turn. Of course, what that then does mean is that if you take any attacks of opportunity between unequipping and equipping your sword, and also equipping your crossbow, you would be making an attack of opportunity with an unarmed strike, which I believe is only 1 point of damage. So that is interesting, and I think it will make it tactically more fun, and equally a more risky and important move in terms of equipping and unequipping weapons, particularly given as you now can't just simply drop a weapon and then draw another. Moving between attacks. If you move on your turn, you can use some or all of that movement to move between the attacks of this action if you have a feature. such as extra attack, which gives you more than one attack as part of the action. So I'll just read that again. If you move on your turn, you can use some or all of that movement to move between the attacks of this action if you have a feature such as extra attack that gives you more than one attack as part of the attack action. So if you have 2 attacks, you now don't actually have to target the same one, because you could attack, move, provoke an attack of opportunity, and then attack somebody else. Which is more of a clarification, I think, than necessarily a rules change, if memory serves. But good to know and good to see that that has been clarified. So, blind sight. If you have blind sight, you can see within a specific range without relying on physical sight. Within that range, you can effectively see anything that isn't behind total cover, even if you have the blinded condition or are in darkness. Moreover, in that range, you can effectively see a creature that has the invisible condition. Which is interesting, because blind sight, I don't know if blind sight actually allowed you to see invisible creatures before. I'm just trying to think now if that is the case. I'm going to bring up D&D Beyond in a second and have a look and see what it comes up with in terms of the specific ruling of that. But my understanding is that blind sight is one of those things that doesn't come up very often. That it didn't allow you to see invisible creatures. The invisible condition does come in a few ways, though, so it doesn't necessarily mean that one is invisible so much as very well hidden. So it'll be interesting to see if that is the case. Let me just have a quick look just to clarify this. So blind sight, as it is currently reading on D&D Beyond. Oh, there's a dagger of blind sight. Let me see if that's going to link me up. No. Damn it. I can't remember. That's really bugging me. Oh, here we are. Giant bat. You have blind sight. Blind sight. Yeah, no reference here to anything being invisible. A monster with blind sight can perceive its surroundings without relying on sight within a specific radius. Creatures without eyes, such as grimlocks and grey oozes, typically have this special sense, as do creatures with echolocation or heightened senses, such as bats and true dragons. If a monster is naturally blind, it has a parenthetical note to this effect, indicating that the radius of its blind sight defines the maximum range of its perception. So no specifics as it relates to invisible creatures, which is very interesting indeed. So blind sight now almost kind of treading on true sight's toes, I suppose. So climb speed. A climb speed can be used to traverse a vertical surface without expending the extra movement normally associated with climbing. Some creatures have the spider climb trait, which allows their climb speed to work even on the underside of horizontal surfaces. So climb speed normally, climbing would normally essentially be treated as, I believe, difficult terrain, meaning that you're actually going to cost you double to actually climb. So if, for example, you were climbing up a 20-foot ledge, you would... let's do a 30-foot ledge, because it's probably easier. A 30-foot ledge, you're actually going to have to dash in order to climb up it. That's going to use your full movement twice, because the 30-foot ledge, if your speed is 30 foot, you'd only be climbing up 15 foot per move action. So they've clarified that the climb speed doesn't have additional costs. So now creature type. This is something that was brought up at the beginning, as I showed you. So, creature type. Every creature in D&D, including every player character, has a special tag in the rules that identifies the type of creature it is. Most player characters are of the humanoid type. Here is a list of the game's creature types in alphabetical order. Aberration, beast, celestial, construct, dragon, elemental, fey, fiend, giant, humanoid, monstrosity, ooze, plant, and undead. No new ones. I don't believe any have been taken out either. And just a note, these types don't have rules themselves, but some rules in the game affect creatures of certain types in different ways. For example, the description of the Charm Person spell specifies that its target must be a humanoid. So these creature types essentially just function as tags as a way for the rules to reference and filter out creatures or creature types either in a positive or negative way. So, for example, you might have effect that can only affect dragons, for example. So it's just an easy way for the rules to reference that, and that's now been defined within the player's handbook. Or soon will be in the 2024 player's handbook coming next year. So now D20 tests, this is a term that I was referring to earlier and said that we would cover. So the term the D20 test encompasses the three main D20 rolls of the game: ability checks, attack rolls, and saving throws. If something in the game affects D20 tests, it affects all three of these rolls. The DM determines whether a D20 test is warranted in any given circumstance. I do kind of like the fact that they have put everything under the banner of D20 tests. I don't know if I like the name D20 tests particularly, but the fact that they have gone through and put them all under one umbrella for what is essentially the same mechanic. You roll a D20, you have a target number to beat, add any modifiers. Do you beat it? Yay. If you don't beat it, boo. And ability checks, attack rolls, and saving throws all function exactly the same way. It's just different modifiers, perhaps, that you might apply. So for new dungeon masters and players alike, certainly, this idea of the D20 test is an all-encompassing term for anything that follows that mechanic, which, from a quality of life standpoint, I think is very, very welcome. I just don't like the term D20 test. It is so unfantasy in many, many ways. What I would call it, I don't know. But a D20 test sounds a bit clinical to me as a term. But there we are. So, the dazed condition. Now, this is one part where I really do fall down as a dungeon master, is the conditions. There's so many different parts of them that I really do struggle to keep up with what they all are. So the dazed condition is actually a new condition, which is interesting. So while dazed, you experience the following effect: limited activity. You can move or take one action on your turn, but not both. You also can't take a bonus action or a reaction. So this is meant to, simulate being dazed, that kind of being slightly out of it. Still being able to function, but in a limited capacity. Yes, good. Nice to see some new conditions, and I think there are a few more that will come up as well. So, now we move to death saving throws. On your third successful death save, you regain 1 hit point, but are unconscious and start a short rest. You remain unconscious until you regain more hit points, or until another creature uses an action to administer first aid to you, which requires a successful DC 10 Wisdom Medicine check. This playtest rule removes the notion of being stable at 0 hit points, and it removes the stabilizing a creature rule on 197 of the player's handbook. So, I just wanted to kind of remind you, because the wordings are very particular here. So, as it pertains to death saving throws currently in the 2014 Player's Handbook, when you, if you roll a 20 on a d20, you regain 1 hit point. Hang on, where is it here? Stabilizing a creature. The best way to save a creature with 0 hit points is to heal it. If the healing is unavailable, the creature can at least be stabilized, so that it isn't killed on a failed save. You can use your action to administer first aid to an unconscious creature and attempt to stabilize it, which requires a DC 10 Wisdom Medicine check, which is exactly the same. A stable creature doesn't make saving throws, even though it has 0 hit points, but it remains unconscious. The creature stops being stable and must start making death saving throws again. If it takes any damage, a stable creature that isn't healed regains 1 hit point after 1d4 hours. This playtest rule removes the notion of being stable at 0 hit points. So the idea is that you can't be stable at 0 hit points. To be stable, you have to have at least 1 hit point, I guess, is what they're trying to say here. That having 0 hit points and being stabilized is not going to be enough. I just want to read it again because I'm not sure if that actually tracks with how they've written it. On your 3rd successful death save, you regain 1 hit point, but you are unconscious and start a short rest. You remain unconscious until you regain more hit points or until another creature uses an action to administer first aid to you. Right, okay. So the first aid is about regaining consciousness rather than stabilizing. So that medicine check isn't actually about stabilizing a creature. Stabilizing a creature is not really a thing anymore. Which is interesting. Basically, you gain healing, and that's that, essentially. It's weird. I'm struggling to get my head around it so much, to be perfectly honest. I guess I'm just so used to the way that it has been done all this time with the stabilizing of a creature. But it's an interesting thing that they're trying out, and I'll be intrigued to see how well that works at a table. I'd quite like to see that clarified a little bit and maybe worded a little bit better, because it's a little bit vague in my opinion. So difficult terrain. Now this is not something I was expecting to see in this playtest material. If a space is difficult terrain, every foot of movement in that space costs 1 extra foot. For example, moving 5 feet through difficult terrain costs 10 feet of movement. Difficult terrain isn't cumulative. Either a space is difficult terrain or it isn't. A space is difficult terrain for a creature if the space contains any of the following: a creature that isn't tiny or your ally, furniture that is 1 size smaller than you or larger, heavy snow, heavy undergrowth, ice, liquid that's been between shin and waist deep, any deeper and you need to swim, narrow opening that is sized for a creature 1 size smaller, pit or another gap of 2 to 5 feet, rubble or a slope of 20 degrees or more. The DM may determine that other things make a space count as difficult terrain based on the examples here. I really, really like that they've gone to the trouble of listing out various forms of difficult terrain. These, I believe, in the 2014 Player's Handbook and indeed the Dungeon Master's Guide from 2014 are all kind of spread out all around the books, and indeed some of the adventure modules as well. So I like that there is a definitive list, and also then they just say, well, the DM can determine some other things as well, but here are the definitive lists of things, which is nice, and I think will reduce down disputes, particularly if they are referenced in the Player's Handbook in an explicit a way as this. So now we come to expertise, which is something that is kind of already existent in 5th edition, which I believe is as a feature or maybe even a feat or both. And expertise is something that they're really kind of leaning into as a general feature. So they're really clarifying it here. So expertise is a special feature that enhances your use of a particular skill proficiency. If you gain expertise, you gain it in one skill in which you have proficiency. You can never have expertise in the same skill proficiency more than once. And when you make an ability check with a skill proficiency in which you have expertise, your proficiency bonus is doubled for that check. So again, mechanically nothing really different here as far as I can tell. It's pretty much the same. It's just been promoted, shall we say, to a game mechanic rather than just something that crops up every now and then. That's how I understand it anyway. So, fly speed. A fly speed can be used to travel through the air. While you have fly speed, you can stay aloft until you land, fall, or die. If flying, you fall if you lack the hover trait and have the incapacitated or prone condition, or your fly speed is reduced to 0. I like the clarification here in terms of the hovering aspect, because I know that is something that has been somewhat of a debate of late. I think because they've removed the hover trait from certain races or species, as they're referring to them now. So I like that this has been clarified, but again, nothing really mechanically too different, just a clarification, I think. The grappled condition. So when you are grappled, let me just get my DM screen out so I can quickly reference the old version. So the old version was this. A grappled creature's speed becomes 0 and can't benefit from any bonuses to its speed. The condition ends if the grappler is incapacitated, and the condition also ends if an effect removes the grappled creature from the reach of the grappler or grappling effect, such as when a creature is hurled away by the Thunderwave spell. So, the new version here, speed is 0 and can't change, so they have somewhat reworded that. I'm not entirely sure why, but it's much more definitive, I guess. You have disadvantage on attack rolls against any target other than the grappler, which makes sense. You're not going to have disadvantage on somebody that's grappling you because you could just, elbow them in the stomach or whatever. Movable. The grappler can drag or carry you when it moves, but every foot of movement costs it extra foot, so essentially travelling through difficult terrain, unless you are tiny or 2 more sizes smaller than the grappler. And escape. While grappled, you can use your action to make a strength, athletics, or dexterity acrobatics check against the grapple's DC, ending the condition on yourself on a success. The condition also ends if the grappler has the incapacitated condition, or if the distance between you and the grappler exceeds the grapple's range. So that is mostly the same in terms of some aspects, but they've really added these extra bits and pieces like the movable aspect. They've clarified that, because that does sometimes come up. How easy is it to move somebody if they're grappled? Well, yeah, you can move them. But obviously it's going to cost you movement because they're heavier. And also they've really clarified how one escapes the grapple condition, which I guess probably makes things a little bit easier in terms of monster stat blocks and abilities and things, in terms of just, rather than having to clarify in the feature itself how to escape the grapple, they can simply now just say the target now has the grappled condition, because that is then explained within the grappled condition. Now we have the help action. Now I'm going to get on my I don't know, is it a soapbox in a minute, I guess, because I have some theories on certain things here, and everything being defined, everything the characters can do being defined as an action, which was not necessarily the case previously, but anyway. So the help action. When you take the help action, you can do one of the following. You can assist an ability check, wherein you choose one of your skills or tool proficiencies and one ally who can perceive you. You give advantage to the next ability check that ally makes with the chosen skill or tool. So, for example, if you're a rogue who has proficiency in thieves' tools, and somebody wants to pick a lock, but they don't have proficiency in thieves' tools, or they don't have thieves' tools, rather, they can't do so with advantage. They would have to use those tools, but I suppose you could give it to them. This benefit expires if the ally doesn't use it before the start of your next turn. To give this assistance, you must be near enough to the ally to assist verbally or physically when the ally makes the check. The DM has final say on whether your assistance is possible. Now, this is where I get into it. So, it's interesting that assisting in an ability check, which generally speaking is not often done in combat. Mostly it's attacks and powers and spells and various other things. Very rarely ability checks. Now, interesting that it has to be used before the start of the player's next turn, because this is something that probably is most likely going to be used outside of combat. So I wonder, and I've said this a few times in some of the other videos, I wonder if they are planning on adding more procedural structure to the exploration pillar of the game, such as dungeon crawling or indeed wilderness exploration. I hope to God they do, because to me that is where 5e gets let down a little bit by its design in the exploration pillar, which is my personal favourite pillar of the entire game. So I'm hoping that this is just a small sign that that is something that is high on the priority list of the game designers for the next iteration of 5th edition, which I'm dubbing 5.1, by the way, and I have been dubbing 5.1 for a very long time privately, because when people called it 5.5, it's not as big of a leap as 3.5 even was. It's very, very minor changes, particularly at the moment. Anyway, so you can assist an ability check, or as part of the help action, you can assist an attack roll. You momentarily distract an enemy within 5 feet of you, granting advantage to the next attack roll by one of your allies against that enemy. This benefit expires at the start of your next turn. Now, I don't believe, although I'm willing to be corrected here, I don't believe that the help action previously allowed you to do that, or did it? Oh no, you could give advantage. Okay. Yeah, there's not really much that's mechanically changed here. And now I'm doubting myself about the before the start of your next turn with the ability check, because actually it's stated in 5th edition, so maybe my theory is incorrect. This could simply be more to do with VTTs than necessarily exploration, which would be a shame. So, now we move on to this thing called Heroic Advantage, which is basically a new term that they've come up with, specifically as it relates to inspiration. Now, interestingly, they haven't said that they are getting rid of the term inspiration, but are instead keeping both Heroic Advantage and Inspiration. So when you have Heroic Advantage, also called Inspiration, you can expend it to give yourself advantage on a d20 test. You decide to do so immediately after rolling the d20, so before you know whether it's a success or not. The DM can award Heroic Advantage to a player character who's done something that is particularly heroic or in character. Some game features, such as the human, also award Heroic Advantage. And now, I don't particularly utilise Inspiration in my games, in that I tend not to reward it as a Dungeon Master. Mainly because, if I'm honest, I forget the mechanic exists. And I forget the mechanic exists because there's nothing really built into the system that, or at least as it currently exists, that encourages inspiration to be given out. So I like the fact that there are now game features, such as in the human, that actually actively award Heroic Advantage. I think that's a very good thing. I also did like the thing that they had in one of the other playtest materials, where if you rolled a natural 1, that would also give you inspiration or Heroic Advantage. But that's since gone, which is a shame. I know some people have used that at their tables and kept it, actually, because I quite like it as a rule. But again, I like the fact that there are some features that do actively award it now. They have also clarified you can never have more than one instance of Heroic Advantage. But they have also clarified that if something gives it to you and you already have it, you can pick, or choose rather, to give it to another player character in your group who lacks it. So they have clarified that. Now then, the hide action. With the hide action, you can try to conceal yourself. To do so stealthily, you must succeed on a DC 15 dexterity stealth check while you're heavily obscured or behind 3/4 cover or total cover, and you must be out of any visible enemy's line of sight. If you can see a creature, you can discern whether it can see you. On a successful check, you have the invisible condition. Make note of your character check's total, which will become the DC for a creature to find you with a wisdom perception check. The condition ends on you immediately after any of the following occurrences. You make a sound. Any of the following occurrences. Number 1, you make a sound louder than a whisper. Number 2, an enemy finds you. Number 3, you make an attack roll. And number 4, or you cast a spell with a verbal component. The hide rules have been notoriously difficult to pass in the current iteration of 5th edition, so I like this. Essentially, you either need to be heavily obscured, such as in fog, for example, or you need to be behind 3/4 or total cover. And this will give you the invisible condition, which we'll get to in a bit. 3/4 or more cover, nice and easy. And essentially, it's a contested roll against what stealth check you rolled when you hid versus whether or not anybody else can see you, which will be interesting in terms of passive perception, if that even is still going to be in the game, which I think it will be, because that DC is going to maintain as well, I suppose. Although, actually, you probably rule it that way now anyway. So, now we move to the incapacitated condition. So let me get out the DM screen once again so I can check out the incapacitated condition. Oh, okay, so incapacitated, as it currently stands in the 2014 Player's Handbook, means that you can't take actions or reactions. Simple as that. As you can see, it's slightly more complex here. So, while incapacitated, you experience the following effects. You can't take any action, bonus action, or reaction. Your concentration is broken. You can't speak, and if you are incapacitated when you roll initiative, you have disadvantage on the roll. So the surprise thing that's, I believe, new. The other elements, I think, are actually more clarifications or things being built into the incapacitated condition, because the concentration rules kind of already suggest that if a player character is incapacitated, concentration is automatically broken. But of course, they're moving that into the incapacitated condition. It's probably going to be in the concentration rules as well, which is a good move because it means that you're less likely to miss these specific nuances to the rules. So again, a nice tidying up, a nice quality of life improvement there. The influence action. Now, this is one that I've already covered. It's quite a long one. But this is essentially the social interaction rules of the current iteration of 5th edition, but moved now into an action, which again is interesting. I'm going to get on that soapbox again. I don't know why it needs to be an action rather than a pillar of play, if they're not putting more procedures in place. Would be my hypothesis here. If there's more procedures in place with the exploration side, then the influence action may become more valuable. And again, interesting that they've moved it from a pillar of play or a procedure of the game and into an action. So it works mostly the same. There are some small nuances here. So you can essentially try to influence another creature to do one thing that you request or demand. The DM also gets to decide whether or not this is something that is actually available to the players, because, as it states here, the influence action isn't mind control. And I'm really glad that they've stated that. Just because you roll a natural 20 on your persuasion check does not mean that you are going to absolutely get them to do whatever it is that you want to do. It isn't mind control. So there are 3 parts of this. Again, much like with the social interaction rules, is the creature's attitude, which determines how a character can influence that creature. So each DM-controlled creature has one of the following attitudes towards the players, which is indifferent, friendly, or hostile. Now, indifferent, this is kind of moved into a spectrum. You'll kind of see they've actually simplified these rules rather than having to reference a table, which if you look at the current social interaction rules, I believe in the Dungeon Master's Guide, you have these 3 tables with the various DCs as to how much you can or can't influence these people and what DC you have to hit in order for a creature of varying attitudes to do something which is of personal risk, if they will at all, etc., etc. They've really streamlined it, and I think I quite like it, and I hope you do too. So indifferent. This is the default attitude for any DM-controlled creature. An indifferent creature might help or hinder the party, depending on what the creature sees as most beneficial. A creature's indifference doesn't necessarily make it standoffish or disinterested. Indifferent creatures might be polite and genial, surly and irritable, or anything in between. A successful charisma check is usually necessary when the adventurers try to influence a indifferent creature to do something. A friendly creature wants to help the adventurers and wishes for them to succeed. For tasks or actions that require no particular risk, effort, or cost, friendly creatures often help happily, with charisma checks succeeding automatically. If an element of personal risk is involved, a successful charisma check is usually required to convince a friendly creature to take that risk. Now, that's where it's different. Because a friendly creature normally, in the current rules, you would still require a check, but the DCs would be much lower, which increases, of course, the likelihood of the friendly creature doing that thing. But actually, they've just taken that out entirely and just said, look, if there's no particular risk, effort, or cost, then you can just have them pass automatically. Which I think makes the flow of roleplay probably much better. And I think it's probably more in line with how people actually do these things. The hostile creatures. Hostile creature opposes adventurers and their goals, but doesn't necessarily attack them on sight. The adventurers need to succeed on one or more charisma check to convince a hostile creature to do anything on the party's behalf. So a hostile creature, you have to. There is no question. You have to make a charisma check when you're trying to convince a hostile creature to do anything. However, the DM might determine that the hostile creature is so ill-disposed toward the characters that no charisma check can sway it, in which case the first check fails automatically and no further influence attempts can be made on the creature unless its attitude shift. Hello, Hariyama. Glad to have you here. So yes, so this is kind of the opposite of friendly in that it's undoubtedly you are going to need a charisma check. So the spectrum now has shifted so that an indifferent creature may need a charisma. So yes, a charisma. Sorry, let me try that again. A indifferent creature will usually be necessary in order to influence the creature. A friendly creature can automatically succeed on some charisma checks, but you may need still a charisma check. Whereas a hostile creature, absolutely definitely, a hostile creature is going to need a charisma check in order for you to change their stance, but it might not even be possible to do so. So, with the interaction part of the influence action, when you take the influence action, either roleplay how your character interacts with the creature or describe your character's behaviour, focusing on your character's request or demand. If the interaction is especially suited to the creature's desires and outlook, the DM might temporarily shift a hostile creature to indifferent or an indifferent creature to friendly. Similarly, if the interaction is particularly irksome to the creature, the DM might temporarily shift a friendly creature to indifferent or an indifferent creature to hostile. So again, just really simplifying those interaction rules in terms of basically saying, rather than, because I believe as it currently works is those checks are possible to shift an attitude. This is just simply a case of, well, if the request actually falls in line with their values, then we'll just change their attitude. So you might actually automatically, if you can, with an indifferent creature, if you can get them into a position where actually you're talking about things that are of value to them, they might temporarily become friendly, and then you might automatically succeed on that request just because you've tapped into really what makes the character tick. Which again simplifies that social interaction pillar of the game, and makes it much more in line with, I think, how most people run the roleplay side of things. I know I certainly do. It's very, very rare that those interactions might be might be so rigid in their structure as to make it tricky and necessary for the roles to happen in that manner. So then finally, the ability check. Determine whether your request or demand is successful. Make a charisma check. You have advantage on the check if the creature is friendly, and disadvantage if the creature is hostile. So that is another element of this spectrum here. You're in a position where, yes, okay, you might, or obviously with a hostile creature, you're definitely absolutely going to need a check if it's available to you, and even if it is, you're going to be doing so with disadvantage. So they've really again just streamlined the social interaction rules, taken out the DCs or the varying DCs, which we'll come to in a moment. So choosing a skill, they have actually laid out which skills to use based upon what interaction you're dealing with, and indeed what creature you're dealing with. So animal handling is for gently coaxing a beast or monstrosity. Deception is for deceiving a creature that can understand you. Intimidation, intimidating a creature which doesn't necessarily have to understand you. And persuasion is persuading a creature that can understand you. So if it's a creature that can't understand you, you're left with intimidation or animal handling, essentially. In fact, it might only be intimidating for some creatures, which would be interesting. In terms of setting the DC, the DM sets the check's DC. A good rule of thumb is to set the DC at 15, or at the creature's intelligence or wisdom score, whichever of those three numbers is highest. So I like that they've really simplified the DC. You're looking at 15 or intelligence or wisdom score, whichever one's higher. Just makes that really nice and quick. And also, I like that it's based around the character's stat block rather than this arbitrary table that was laid out. So the outcome. If your check succeeds, the creature does as you requested or demanded based on its understanding and driven by its alignment. It won't do anything that it finds repugnant. And if your check fails, you must wait to make the same request again. The default wait time is 24 hours, which a DM may shorten or extend depending on the circumstances. Now, this I also like. You get one shot at this request, so that interaction becomes even more important now, because if you don't pass this, you're not going to be able to make another D20 test of any kind in order to try and get that result for another 24 hours unless the DM tells you otherwise. So I really, really like the fact that they've codified that, made that really nice and clear. The interaction suddenly becomes more important than the dice roll, because if, for example, you can shift an indifferent creature, which you would roll normally, to a friendly creature by tapping into their various ideals and figuring those out, you will then be rolling with advantage, which is going to make it much more likely that you are going to succeed if you don't have to. So that interaction becomes much, much more important. And also, there's a risk factor now, particularly if time is of the essence, and you need to get something done. Let's say, I don't know, one of the player characters is imprisoned and due to be executed, and you're trying to convince one of the guards, who might be a old friend of yours, to set him free, and they're due to be executed the next day. Like, becomes really, really crucial, and you do not want to mess that up. So that interaction becomes super, super important, which I like. I really, really like the changes that they've made here. So now we move to the invisible... Ooh, goodness me. What was that? Ooh, a subscriber. Thank you. The invisible condition. So... you experience the following effects with the invisible condition. This, I think, has changed or been clarified a little bit based off of the previous version. An invisible creature is impossible to see without... This is the 2014 Player's Handbook version, by the way. An invisible creature is impossible to see without the aid of magic or a special sense. For the purpose of hiding, the creature is heavily obscured. The creature's location can be detected by any noise it makes or any tracks it leaves. Attack rolls against the creature have disadvantage, and the creature's attack rolls have advantage. So, now Whilst you're invisible, you experience the following effects. You aren't affected by any effect that requires its target to be seen. So if they can't see you, they can't do the thing, which again is one of those things that is usually placed, or has been historically placed, within the ability. A creature you can see. And again, I think they're probably going to double up on that to make this much simpler. So surprise. If you are invisible when you roll initiative, you have advantage on the roll. Now that's new, and I certainly like that. It'll be interesting to see actually about the surprise and the surprise round. I have a feeling based off of this that the surprise condition might be gone now, because the surprise seems to be falling into various conditions, and being hidden is going to give you the element of surprise, because being hidden means that you now have the invisible condition, and so you therefore have advantage on the initiative. So it's then about speeding up your initiative, and if that tracks, then mathematically speaking, those that are surprising the other are mathematically much more likely to be higher in the initiative order, though not guaranteed. Attack rolls against you have disadvantage, and your attack rolls have advantage. It's the same. If a creature can somehow see you, as with magical blindsight, you don't gain this benefit against that creature. Now that's a good clarification to make. Makes it really much easier to follow along. So I just wanted to take a moment, by the way, before we carry on. As you've just seen, we have just had a new subscriber, and if you are indeed finding this video useful, or you're enjoying it, then do just make sure to click the subscribe button, hit that bell icon, just so that you can be notified whenever we put any videos up. We're doing these Arcana Unearthed, we have our actual play show, which goes out every Thursday, and there'll be more stuff coming out in the near future as well, I hope. So lots more content. We're really ramping up the content side of things, so do make sure that you do that. And also, I just wanted to highlight as well, if you are in need of a D&D game, you don't have one running, but you really have the itch, maybe watching this video has encouraged you that maybe you need to play a little bit more. I do actually offer my services as a Dungeon Master to members of the public as part of our Bardic Quest Adventurers Guild, which is powered in part by our friends at Start Playing Games. So you can head on over to bardicquest.com/play, where you'll see a list of all of the adventures that we're currently running. These are the ones that we're running as of today, which is Lost Mine, Phandelver, Dragons of Stormwreck Isle, and Tyranny of Dragons. But obviously these will change over time, but due to the time-travelling powers of the internet, this is the moment captured in time. But if you go to bardicquest.com/play, that page will be up to date with all of the latest adventures that we're playing through our Discord community, which is currently only available to those who are members of our Adventurers Guild and members of the table. But it's a nice, fun place. And yes, we're offering those, bardicquest.com/play, if you're in need of a D&D adventuring group. So, let's talk about knocking out a creature. Sometimes an attacker wants to knock out a foe rather than dealing a killing blow. When an attacker would reduce a creature to 0 hit points with a melee attack, the attacker can instead reduce the creature to 1 hit point. The creature then has the unconscious condition and starts a short rest. The creature remains unconscious until it regains any hit points, or until someone uses an action to administer first aid to it, which requires a successful DC 10 Wisdom Medicine check. Now, interestingly, this idea, again, they're kind of removing this idea of reducing a character being reduced to 0 hit points, making them stable. Instead, you'll kind of hit 1 hit point and become unconscious. I wonder if automatically hitting 1 hit points puts you at unconscious and 0 at dying. I don't imagine that's to be the case, but I could be wrong. In fact, there's nothing in here that implies that to be the case, because we probably would have reached that by now. Yeah, we probably would have reached that by now, so that's probably not the case, thinking about it. But it's an interesting change. I kind of like it. It helps clarify things a little bit more. So again, knocking out a creature now gives them the unconscious condition and drops them to 1 hit point rather than 0.
Because really the knocking a creature out rules currently work with the 2014 Player's Handbook as basically it's the same as killing them, except you don't kill them, you just make them unconscious instead. Which is probably simpler, but again, making a mechanical difference I think is helpful. So, long rests. A long rest is a period of extended downtime, at least 8 hours long, available to any creature. During a long rest, you sleep for at least 6 hours and perform no more than 2 hours of light activity, such as reading, talking, eating, or standing watch. During the sleep, you have the unconscious condition. The benefits of a long rest. To start a long rest, you must have at least 1 hit point. When you finish the rest, you gain the following benefits. Regain all your hit points. Regain all spent hit dice. Not sure how I feel about this. I prefer half, which is the current version. But regaining all hit dice, okay, fine. Not sure how I feel. Not sure how I feel. Hit points maximum restored. If your hit point maximum was reduced, it returns to normal? Not sure how I feel about that. I don't think that's part of the current long rest rules. If it is, I missed that a long time ago. And I definitely don't like that being in there. That seems far too OP. As if resting needed any more buffs in 5th edition. Here we are making them even more powerful. My goodness. If any of your ability scores were reduced, they return to normal. Exhaustion is reduced. If you have exhaustion condition, your level of exhaustion is decreased by 1. And some special features are recharged by a long rest. If you have such a feature, it recharges in the way specified in its description. My god, they have souped up long rests. That is ridiculous. These 3 here, the max HP restored, ability score restored. Sorry, not the exhaustion. Actually, these 2. HP max and ability scores being restored from a long rest. That is too much. No. Stop taking... I'm a forever DM for anybody that is new to this channel. I am a forever DM. I don't want my toys taken away from me, damn it. It's difficult enough with 5th edition to make your players feel endangered if you're focusing on hit points. But we as DMs have these various little tricks that we can do to kind of, scare the players a little bit. Look, we don't want to kill them. We're collaborating with them. It's a collaborative, cooperative process. But to create the drama, we need the tools in order to at least allow the players to feel endangered. And reducing hit point maximum is one of those tools. If you've been watching our actual play, Bardic Quest, then this has been something that's actually happened to one of our characters lately, and it would seem completely pointless if actually that could be restored. Hi Jason, good to see you. HP max return to normal would cure, say, a wraith attacked character or a cursed character. Really? I agree 100%, Jason. Too much. Far too much. That's going in my survey for sure. Let's not give the players too much in terms of the healing. That's a little bit... Like, people complain about long rest kind of magically healing things. I think this really takes it to a much worse level. It doesn't fix the problem. After you finish a long rest, you must... This is something that people miss anyway in the current rules. I see all the time on internet forums people saying about, my players are resting all the time. Like, how am I supposed to kill this? This is how. You must wait at least 16 hours before starting another long rest. I think that's slightly changed the wording in that the wording of 5th edition currently is you can only do 1 long rest in a 24-hour period. But this now basically says, right, you're not... Like, you've woken up at 6 o'clock. You now cannot take another long rest until 10 p.m. That is the cutoff point. So you got to survive until then with short rests alone. Interrupting a long rest. A long rest is stopped by the following interruptions: rolling initiative, casting a spell other than a cantrip, taking any damage, or 1 hour of walking or other physical exertion. If the rest was at least 1 hour long before the interruption, you gain the benefits of a short rest. You can resume a long rest immediately after an interruption. If you do so, the rest requires 1 additional hour to finish per interruption. So you can resume the long rest. So it interrupts, but it doesn't stop the long rest. So, for example, if you get 4 or 5 hours into the long rest and it gets interrupted, you don't then have to do those 4 or 5 hours again plus the remainder. It's just, you're just going to have an additional hour. So in that particular case, if it was, I can't remember how many hours I said, 4 or 5, let's say it was 5, that would mean that you'd have 3 additional hours remaining of your long rest, but you're going to get an extra hour, so you're going to have to do another 4 hours rather than 3 in order to complete that long rest. But you will have had the benefits of a short rest because you've rested for 4 hours. I like the fact that they've built that short rest thing into the long rest as well. I'll be interested to see how the short rest rules have changed. So the magic... Oh, and also, I don't want to skip this bit. Casting a spell other than a cantrip here. Because there's a lot of things you can currently do in a long rest. Because the long rest currently, there's 2 hours of kind of light activity is something that they've said that you can do as part of a long rest. But they've actually clarified here. So yeah, so no more than 2 hours of light activity, but they've actually clarified that casting a spell other than a cantrip is much higher in the spectrum of activity than a light activity. I'll be interested to know if that actually counts towards rituals. That'd be interesting, and it would be nice to get clarification on. Maybe that will come up in the ritual casting. So the magic action. When you take the magic action, you magic something. What? You magic something by casting a spell that has a casting time. Is that really what they've said? Is that their wording here? When you take the magic action, you magic something by casting a spell that has a casting time of an action, or by using a feature or magic item that requires a magic action to be activated. So that's interesting. So magic items are now going to utilize this magic action, which is a new action type. So it's casting a spell or using a feature or magic item that requires the magic action to be activated. If you cast a spell that has a casting time of 1 minute or longer, you must take the magic action on each turn of that casting, and you must maintain concentration whilst you do so. If your concentration is broken, the spell fails, but you don't expend the spell slot. I like that this has been clarified. Mechanically speaking, it's probably not actually anything different to how you would do it anyway, but it's been nicely placed inside the magic action just for clarification, which is again a nice quality of life improvement to how the rules are written, which I think will go down well. Move. When you move, you can go a distance equal to your speed or less. For example, if you have a speed of 30 feet, you can go up to 30 feet when you move. Difficult terrain can slow you down. As we've discussed earlier, it's going to be double movement. Breaking up your move. You can break up your move using some of its movement before and after any action you take on the same turn. For example, if you have a speed of 30 feet, you can go 10 feet, take an action, and then go 20 feet. Again, that's no different to how it currently works, but nicely clarified. Moving around other creatures. During your move, you can pass through the space of an ally, a creature that has the incapacitated condition, a tiny creature, or a creature who is 2 sizes larger or smaller than you. Another creature's space is difficult terrain for you unless that creature is tiny or your ally. You can't willingly end your move in a space occupied by another creature. Excuse me. Again, I think this is pretty much the same. If there are any changes, they're very minor. I can't see any that are jumping out of me. Again, it's just nice rewording and clarification. Changes to your speed. If an effect increases or decreases your speed for a time, any special speed you have increases or decreases by an equal amount for the same duration. For example, if your speed is reduced to 0 and you have a climb speed, your climb speed is also reduced to 0. Similarly, if your speed is halved and you have a fly speed, your fly speed is also halved. Again, I don't think any different in terms of how it works, but nicely reworded and nicely clarified. The ritual casting thing. Here we are. Oh, and short rests are coming up as well, so that'll be interesting to see. So, ritual casting. If you have a spell prepared that has the ritual tag, you can cast that spell as a ritual. A special feature is no longer required for ritual casting. I don't know how I feel about that. All other rules in Rituals in the 2014 Player's Handbook still apply. So nothing here with regard to the interruption of a long rest. So that suggests to me that a ritual casted spell will still interrupt a long rest. I think that really does need clarification, I think. Because that's open to interpretation. Because you could say, well, it's not a spell, it's a ritual, so that's not going to break it. I think I'd be inclined to say that it would, but I'd really like some clarification on that from the guys at Wizards of the Coast. I don't know how I feel about the not needing a ritual caster feature, and just any spell that is a ritual. I think I prefer the ritual caster feature. It makes it more unique to certain people. And it's an extra power, like the idea of the wizard being a ritual caster versus somebody who isn't. Although that being said, do all of the spellcasting classes have... No, they don't all have ritual caster. They can't do. Certainly the half-casters probably don't. The half-casters being those classes like rangers and paladins who are... there's spells as part of their... classes, but not necessarily the key part. It's often referred to as a half caster. I believe because of the amount or lack of spell slots that they get. So the search action. This is a new action as well, and here we are again with that thing I keep saying about, are they really codifying the exploration pillar? Because this certainly, as an action, really implies that is the case, because I really can't imagine utilizing the search action as part of combat. So when you take the search action, you make a wisdom check to discern something that isn't obvious. The search table suggests which skills are applicable when you take this action, depending on what you're trying to detect. Insight, a creature's state of mind. Medicine, a creature's ailment. Perception, concealed creature or object. And survival, tracks or food. Again, the only one I can think of here that you might use in combat... Well, I suppose perception, if you're trying to find a hidden creature, I suppose, maybe. The perception check would be something that you'd use. I mean, yeah, maybe you could all use all of these, actually. Well, not that you'd want to really look for tracks or food in combat. It's just interesting to me that the search action has been placed as an action now. Because really, when you think of the search action, you're thinking of it more likely within the exploration pillar of the game, such as dungeon crawling. Excuse me. So I suspect quite heavily that this is part of what I hope will be the codification of the exploration pillar of the game, like dungeon crawling and wilderness adventures. So, short rests. A short rest is a 1-hour period of downtime during which a creature does nothing more strenuous than eating, drinking, reading, dozing, and standing watch. Excuse me. Goodness me. Sorry. To start a short rest, you must have at least 1 hit point. When you finish the rest, you gain the following benefits. Spend hit dice. You can spend 1 or more of your hit dice to regain hit points. For each hit die you spend in this way, roll the die and add your constitution modifier to it. You regain hit points equal to the total, minimum of 1 hit point. You can decide to spend an additional hit die after each roll. So you don't have to determine it up front. You don't need to say, I'm going to do 3. You can just do 1 at a time if you want to. Some features are recharged by a short rest. If you have such a feature, it recharges in the way specified in its description. So short rests mechanically working exactly the same. Interrupting a short rest, they're interrupted if you roll initiative. Cast a spell other than a cantrip, that's another one. So I guess... actually, no, that's not important. I was going to say, I guess, identify, but you identify without casting the identify spell with a short rest, so that's not important. Or taking any damage. An interrupted short rest confers no benefits and must be started over to confer any. Now we have the study action. When you take the study action, you make an intelligence check to study your memory, a book, a creature, a clue, an object, or another source of knowledge, and call to mind an important piece of information about it. The areas of knowledge table suggests which skills are applicable when you take this action, depending on the area of knowledge the intelligence check is about. And you can see this list here. I won't go through them because it's quite a big list, but you can see it on the screen if you're watching. Yes, Jason, to take a long or short rest, you do need 1 hit point. I know you joined in fairly late, but now essentially when you are now being stabilized is not really a thing. So when you are basically, if you are unconscious and stable, you now have 1 hit point. If you're at 0, then you are essentially dying, and once you are no longer dying, you automatically go up to 1 hit point. So they've slightly changed the mechanics on that. So yes, you do need 1 hit point to take a long or short rest now, because they've changed the mechanics around stabilization and dying. Swim speed can be used to travel through a liquid without expending the extra movement normally associated with swimming. Telepathy. A magical ability that allows a creature to communicate mentally with another creature within a specified range. The contacted creature doesn't need to share a language with the telepath to understand this communication, but the contacted creature must be able to understand at least one language or be telepathic itself to understand. A telepath doesn't need to see a contacted creature, and the telepath can start or end the telepathic contact at any time, no action required. Telepathic contact is broken as soon as the contacted creature is no longer within the telepath's range, if the telepath contacts a different creature within range, or if the telepath has the incapacitated condition. A creature without telepathy can receive telepathic messages but can't initiate a telepathic conversation. Once a telepathic conversation starts, the non-telepath can communicate mentally to the telepath until the telepathic connection ends. Again, I don't think there's anything really major here, nothing too mind-blowing here, no pun intended. But again, nice that it's been clarified. I just want to quickly go back to the study action, by the way. I'm going to go on that soapbox again. The study action here, there's 2 things. One, the study action, again, more the exploration pillar than it is combat. So interesting that that's been put into an action. Are they going to codify the exploration pillar? God, I hope so. I keep saying it over and over again, but I really do hope so. But also, interestingly, what this does is it also clarifies one very important thing, which is going to change the way that I run things, because I'm pretty generous on this, is that recalling knowledge is now an action in combat. Which I think, technically speaking, rules as written with 5th edition is still the case anyway, because they say that utilizing a skill or ability check is an action. But I've kind of been really lenient with knowledge things, because I don't think that thinking back to something that you already know would constitute having to work as hard as swinging a sword. So I've been quite generous with that, but they have explicitly stated that the study action now absolutely should still be an action. So it's going to change something for the way I run things, at least, which is technically house ruled, if I'm honest, because technically speaking that should have been the case anyway. But I just wanted to flag that up just in case there are any DMs out there that run things the way I do as well. So teleportation now. Teleportation is a special kind of magical transportation. If you teleport, you disappear and reappear elsewhere instantly without moving through the intervening space. This transportation doesn't expend movement unless a rule tells you otherwise, and teleportation never provokes opportunity attacks. When you teleport, all the equipment you are wearing and carrying teleports with you. If you are touching another creature when you teleport, that creature doesn't teleport with you unless the teleportation effect says otherwise. If the destination space of your teleportation is occupied by another creature or blocked by a solid obstacle, you instead appear in the nearest unoccupied space of your choice. The description of a teleportation effect tells you if you must see the teleportation's destination. Again, I don't think anything mind-blowing here, just kind of removing some of the teleportation rules out of things like spells and features and putting them into a nice, clear rule structure, which I don't think exists in the core rulebooks, but it might do. It might just have been clarified. But the fact that it's in the Rules Glossary in Unearthed Arcana says, at the very least, they've reworded it, if not included it before. So tools proficiencies. If you have proficiency with a tool, you can add your proficiency bonus to any ability check you make that uses that tool. So that's the same. If you have proficiency in the skill that's also used with the check, you have advantage on the check too. This means you can benefit from both a skill and a tool proficiency on the same ability check. Now, this is kind of a change, but kind of not. So this first part is what is in the core rulebooks of 5th edition 2014 Player's Handbook, in that you get the proficiency bonus on an ability check that uses that tool. But I believe in the Player's Handbook it explicitly states that because it's a proficiency bonus that you're getting, you're not actually going to get the proficiency bonus again for being trained in that skill. So if I think, for example, I'm trying to think of a tool that might be appropriate. Oh yeah, so the performance skill. If you are performing with your loot and you are proficient with a loot, and you're proficient with performance, you'll only get your proficiency bonus once, even though you're playing with a loot and you're also you're a very good performer generally, and playing with the loot. You only get the benefits of one. But then, when they released Xanathar's Guide to Everything, they added this kind of optional rule, wherein if you are proficient in both, you get advantage on the roll, which I think makes much more sense, because it's a bit of a pain in the backside, quite frankly, how it exists in the core rules, and I try to remember to utilise the Xanathar's optional rule when I can. But now what they're doing is they're moving it out of Xanathar's Guide to Everything and into the core Player's Handbook, so that it is now a core rule, which I think is completely the right choice. Tremor Sense. A creature with Tremor Sense can pinpoint the location of creatures and moving objects within a specific range, provided that the creature with Tremor Sense and anything it's detective are both in contact with the same surface, such as the ground, or wall, or a ceiling, or the same liquid. Tremor Sense can't detect creatures or objects in the air, and Tremor Sense doesn't count as a form of sight, which I think is the same. I'm not sure actually about the not counting as a form of sight, though. Although it's put under senses as opposed to sight. So I don't think that has changed at all. I think just clarified again. True Sight. A creature with True Sight has enhanced vision within a specified range. Within that range, the creature's vision pierces through the following. Darkness. A creature can see in normal and magical darkness. Invisibility. A creature can see creatures that have the invisible condition and objects that are obscured by magic. Visual illusions appear transparent to the creature, and the creature automatically succeeds on saving throws against them. The creature discerns the true form of any creature or object it sees that has been transformed by magic, and the creature can see into the ethereal plane. Again, I don't think anything's actually explicitly changed here, but what has changed is that True Sight is going to be included in the player's handbook, because there are now some features that are coming up in some of the new subclasses that do actually give True Sight to player characters, and I believe, as it currently exists in 5th edition 2014 version, True Sight is only ever really available to monsters, I believe, unless I'm conflating that with something else, which I don't think I am. So this is a new feature for player characters, but not necessarily new to the game. Unarmed Strike. An unarmed strike is a melee attack that involves you using your body to damage, grapple, or shove a creature within 5 feet of you. When you use your unarmed strike, choose one of the following options for its effect. Damage. You make an attack roll against the target. Your bonus to hit equals your strength modifier plus your proficiency bonus. On a hit, the target takes bludgeoning damage equal to 1 plus your strength modifier, which I believe is still the same. Grapple. So this is part of the unarmed strike, so you can grapple as part of the unarmed strike now. The target must succeed on a strength or dexterity saving throw. It chooses which. Or it has the grappled condition. The DC for the saving throw and any escape attempts equals 8 plus your strength modifier plus your proficiency bonus. This grapple is possible only if the target is no more than one size larger than you, and if you have a hand free to grab it. And equally, shove. The target must succeed on a strength or dexterity saving throw. It chooses which, or you either push the target 5 feet away or cause it to have the prone condition. The DC for the saving throw equals 8 plus your strength modifier plus your proficiency bonus. This shove is possible only if the target is no more than one size larger than you, and I think that's it. Yeah. Okay. So again, not much has changed mechanically speaking. Just kind of the way that it's presented. The damage is the same with an unarmed strike, but previously, I believe, an unarmed strike was only a damage attack. They've now put grapple and shove into that type of melee attack. So whereas grapple might have been an action and shove might have been an action before, they now come under the attack action underneath the unarmed strike. So you make an attack action with an unarmed strike in order to grapple. So you get to choose which one of those that you do. I don't know if that makes things easier or more complicated, if I'm perfectly honest. I don't know why they've decided to do that. The grapple action versus an attack. I suppose because all three of them are aggressive, it kind of makes more sense for it to be in an attack, I guess, maybe. Maybe that's kind of where they're going with it. So maybe just quality of life, clarity improvement. But mechanically, I don't see anything here that's really any different. Now, the unconscious condition. I have a feeling this might have changed a little bit. While we'll actually look at the unconscious condition as it exists in the the Dungeon Master's screen. An unconscious creature is incapacitated, can't move or speak, and is unaware of its surroundings. The creature drops whatever it's holding and falls prone. The creature automatically fails strength and dex saves. Attack rolls against the creature have advantage, and any attack that hits the creature is a critical hit if the attacker is within 5 feet of the creature. So, with the unconscious condition now, you have the incapacitated and prone conditions, and you drop whatever you're holding. When this condition ends, you remain prone, so that's the same. Speed is reduced to 0 and can't change. That is... I'm pretty sure that's in here. No, actually, that's not actually explicitly stated, which is interesting. I suppose because of the incapacitated condition, it probably did. No, actually. So actually, that was never actually clarified, which is really interesting. That's a loophole. So that is, technically speaking, a clarification rather than a mechanical difference, because I think everybody assumes that if you're unconscious, your speed is 0, but it doesn't look as though it's explicitly stated in the 5th edition rules, which is freaking hilarious. Attack rolls against you have advantage, so that's the same. Automatically fail strength and dex saving throws, also the same. And any attack roll that hits you is a critical hit if the attacker was within 5 feet of you, so that's the same as well. And you are unaware of your surroundings. So again, nothing really groundbreaking here, although the clarification on the speed is hilarious. Jason, grapple as attack and interpretation of invisibility is important. What are you saying there? Grapple as attack, important, yes. Invisibility, what are you trying to say here? Are the two linked? Artifact hit by any effect that requires its target to be seen. Yeah, maybe clarify that if you can, Jason, if you get in there before I end the stream, because I'll be wrapping up in a moment. But I can't quite understand what you mean by that. So grapple as attack and interpretation of invisibility is important. So the invisible condition, again, I think you came in after I covered the invisible condition, but the invisible condition doesn't necessarily mean that you are actively invisible so much as you can't be seen. So when you hide now, you automatically get the invisible condition, which actually, is that a new condition? I'm trying to think now. Is that a new condition? No, it's not a new condition. I had a moment there. No, it's not a new condition, but yes, when you are hidden, you become invisible, and it's just a way of streamlining the hidden rules and the hide rules, which are notoriously difficult to pass, I think, from the current writing of it in the 2014 Player's Handbook. Although I don't know how that relates to grapple. I don't know if you did mean them to be related at all in what you were saying. But the interpretations on both on the invisibility is much clearer now. And grapple as an attack, important. Invisibility ends with attack, so grapple ends invisibility. Okay. Let me see. Oh, you're talking about the invisibility spell, is that? You aren't affected by any effect that requires its target to be seen. If you're invisible when you roll initiative, you have advantage. And so attack rolls against you have disadvantage. Invisible as the spell. Yeah, okay. Yes, I think so. So the grapple would end the invisibility, but you would still be doing so with disadvantage. You'd be rolling with disadvantage. Target must succeed on a strength dexterity saving throw. And it has the grappled condition. The DC for this grapple is possible only if the target is no more than one size larger than you and if you have a free hand to grab it. So because it would be an attack roll... No, it wouldn't be an attack roll. Because that's not part of the grapple. That's only if you're going for the damage. So actually, they succeed on a strength or dexterity saving throw. Would they get advantage on that? No. Interesting. And you wouldn't actually have disadvantage either for going for the grapple attack, which I don't know if that's actually any different to how it currently works. But that's interesting and maybe something that might need some clarification, because you're completely right, the invisible spell, this is where the hiding rules are a little bit wonky, because you could argue that if you're going to try and grapple somebody that's invisible, that you basically still get to do it, just with disadvantage, and they have to succeed on a strength or dex saving throw, and the invisible person doesn't get any advantage to that either. So you're going to grapple, you don't have to roll anything, they're just going to roll a strength or dex saving throw as normal. I think they should probably get some advantage to that. But I also suppose one could argue that the DM could rule that actually, well, how the hell are you going to grapple them if you can't see them? Point is, an invisible thing grapples, thus ending the spell. Please, just bear with me one moment. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. I had to take a delivery there for a second. Point is, an invisible thing grapples, thus ending the spell. Grappling when invisible is what you're saying. Okay. Oh, I understand what you're saying. So because grapple is now an attack action, you would automatically end the invisibility. Which I think, to be perfectly honest, I don't know if that's actually something that has changed. Because I think it would make perfect sense anyway. Because you don't get any benefits for being invisible if you're physically grappling somebody. And you shouldn't get any benefits from being invisible when you're physically grappling somebody anyway. So I think that's absolutely right, that the grappling should... If you are grappling somebody when you're invisible, then absolutely, yes, it should. Which I guess is probably what you're saying here. Because I don't know if grapple falls under an attack in the current rulings of 5th edition. So I think it's... I don't know what your opinion on it is, Jason, but I certainly think it's completely right that a grapple should end the invisible spell. And thus, in this particular instance, the invisibility condition. So this has been fun. It's been nice to have a little bit of interaction on these live streams. As I say, the live stream thing is fairly new to me, and I'm glad that I now have finally got it on the screen, so you actually can see and follow along with what it is that I'm seeing and reading. That makes it a little bit easier for you to follow along. But that is going to be it for this particular episode of Arcana Unearthed. It's nice to go through the rules glossary just for some clarification on some things. And next episode of this, we're going to look at the cleric, and hopefully, if we have time, the cleric subclasses as well. I'm kind of anticipating, because I've not actually read it yet, but I'm kind of anticipating that the cleric is going to be doing more backpedaling, because a lot of this playtest packet number 6 has actually been with regard to backpedaling some of the decisions that they made early on with 1 D&D, when it was kind of the next iteration of D&D, as opposed to just improvements to 5th edition. So this playtest material has certainly been a backpedal of some of those things, and I'm kind of anticipating that's going to be the same with the cleric, probably with some nice new improvements thrown in there a little bit for fun. But we'll see. The cleric was quite the overhaul last time, so I'm anticipating some of that. Mention grapple while invisible. Advantage to start the grapple. Well, you would. Sorry, we're going back to the invisible thing just before we go. So what you're saying, Jason, is that with you imagine grapple while invisible, advantage to start the grapple, but it looks as though there's going to be more to that. But what you're saying is that you would anticipate that they would have advantage. Well, attack rolls do have advantage if you're invisible. So that would make sense. So you get the benefits of them not being able to see you, which is good. Which I guess is probably what you're suggesting to be the case anyway. But anyway, you go back and forth on that. Do take a look. There'll be a link, or there should be a link already in the description of this video if you did want to take a look and kind of poke that apart. But again, nice to have these interactions in the chat as we're doing these live streams. So if you have found this video to be useful and insightful in any way, shape or form, please do me a big massive favour and smash that like button. At the moment, I'd be happy with 30 likes if we can get them on a video for these live streams, because it really does help to reach out and build the community a little bit more. And we're looking to do more of these, and also more types of content and more videos and things of various different things as well. And of course our actual play, which is the main show, Bardic Quest, where you can follow along with us and our adventures as we're currently going through the Lost Mine of Phandelver, if you haven't played that adventure, or even if you have, and see how our hapless heroes handle it. So yes, thanks very much for watching, guys, and joining me on this lovely Monday afternoon. I'll be back next Monday, if all goes to plan, looking at the cleric. So, for now, may your dice rolls roll ever in your favour, and happy gaming.